So this is a passage known as the passing of the dweller. The first great step in the ancient initiations was passing the terrifying monster that dwells on the borderline between the physical and the spiritual worlds. The children of light, meaning those who aspire to a Christ life, were told that they could never go forth into distant lands or earn the wages of master builders until they faced with courage and resolution the invisible demon that dwelt ever within them and sought to awaken within the subtle forces of which he was composed. Most people do not meet this fearful figure until, at the time of death, the intelligence functions for a brief time on that borderland of life and death, the so-called, which is its dwelling place. There he crouches, the thing built by the sins of the flesh and the crimes committed in darkness. A specter of unearthly terror, the sum total of perversion, the aggregate of misused forced and perverted talents. Have we ever stopped to think that the things we do unwisely will sometime confront us, like accusing judges, and bar our way to the light that we will someday recognize and seek to serve? Far back, when man first sinned, this creature was born and cried out from the blood of the first of God's children that was slain. Hate and fear, jealousy and greed, passion and lust, thoughtlessness and crime, all these have fed it until today man carries with him an all-powerful thing, reared and nursed by the worst that is in him. A beast-like demon ever spurring him on to crime and perversion, ever tempting him through the medium of habit to sink back into the mire of degeneracy out of which he is crawling so painfully. That is the guardian of the threshold. We have never seen him, but every day we are fighting him, struggling to free ourselves from the coils of sin, which are his manifestations. Every time we master an unworthy trait of character, we are passing the dweller on our threshold. For we are divided from the world of spirit by our sins. And when we master our own mistakes by doing right where we did wrong before, sin becomes less of an obstacle. Finally, we are able to face this creature for the last time, and among the ethers of the higher world struggle with the dragon of karma, until at last we vanquish him, and bathing in his blood become immortal. For energy is the blood of the dweller, and he is built of the energy we have wasted or misused. So he's speaking in somewhat metaphorical, descriptive, poetic terms. And 99% of people really have no idea what this is. If you stay on the spiritual path long enough, it's inevitable that you face this aspect of humanity within yourself. I mean, we can look around and go, certainly there's much perversion. Just the fact that anybody would want to kill another human being, to normal people, it doesn't make sense. You can't resolve your issues with somebody else by taking their life. It's an act of power, it's an act of ego, it's an act of fear, it's an act of hate. So we're not talking about that. That's the one way that some people's dweller on the threshold screws up their mind. How does that happen? What he's saying is that over time, the challenges that you face in the world give rise to ways of thinking. Here's a simple example. If you ever fell in love with you when you were a teenager and you got hurt, which happens to a lot of us, because we don't really know how to be partners when we're teens because the feelings are so intense. We don't realize that if you start to show too much affection for somebody, they freak out and they back off. Or a various number of reasons. We may just be ourselves and the person's uncomfortable with how we are. So let's say you get rejected when you're in the height of feeling in love with somebody. And a lot of times people go, well, okay, I'm never going to become that vulnerable again. That's the beginning of one aspect of this part. So then we go, okay, the dweller on the threshold goes, I must prevent any possible hurt. So how do I do that? Well, when I feel attracted or when I feel drawn to somebody, I can't allow that to show, so then I begin to fulfill these aches and pains through comforts, through alcohol, through drugs, through overeating, through caffeinating, through weird attitudes that develop. And we all have these. And he's saying that in order to cross to this higher level of spiritual awareness, to really penetrate spirituality in a new way, which is not what religion teaches. Religion basically teaches that live a good life and at the end you'll break into heaven and it'll all be harpsichords and streets of gold and you'll meet your loved ones. And I don't know if that's what's going to happen. This kind of stuff resonates more with me because I know the experience of confronting the dweller. And it's possible to be part of our group and never decide to take that on. But I want you to be aware of the fact that that's a huge obstacle. Like one of my teachers used to joke that people go through AA and they give up alcohol, but they take on caffeine, sweets, and cigarettes. So they don't really attend deep enough to that part that's going, I can't handle life because my perception of it has become so distorted that I have to have something. And maybe it's not cigarettes for you or it's not caffeine, but it's, you retreat from the world and depression becomes this sort of cocoon in which I can just, like Manly Hall says, we're in love with self-pity, because self-pity has sort of a comforting energy also. And the dweller remains unfazed because it's keeping us from crossing over. So the challenge then becomes, will I seek out the part of me that has become distorted and perverted in self-protection? And now I have my very private ways in which I comfort myself. And I'm not saying all of that is bad. Like, I'm not saying we're going to live an ascetic life where we never have a piece of chocolate and we never, take a nap and that's not the solution. If you're tired, you need to take a nap, you take a nap. But if you take 3-hour naps every day because you can't handle reality, that's the dweller going like, I'm going to make sure that you don't expose yourself to too much pain and suffering. Now, another side of it is the fear and the hate and the anger and the criticism. There are some people that they look out and all they see is critical elements of humanity. And that's another manifestation of the dweller. It's a protective element to go, nobody really is pure enough. So then, I can sort of maintain my various problems because, look how far beyond these people, at least I've become. That's another aspect of the dweller. Just hating people in general. Hating them because they act this way, because they look this way, because they say these things. So this aspect is a major crossing point in the spiritual journey. And how do you cross it? Well, he's giving the metaphor that it's like a bloody frickin' battle where you have to slay this dragon. And it's not a one-time thing. I mean, it's like every time this stuff rears itself. Like if you notice you're somebody who tends to eat for emotional comfort, which I think everybody does at certain times. And occasionally, I'm not like you got to be so rigid. But I mean, if essentially eating for comfort is the way that you make it through life, then every time you realize you're about to eat when you're not hungry, you face that and go, what is going on? And I guarantee you that dweller inside is going to fight for every tooth and nail for you to be able to maintain that behavior of comfort. Because that's what you've set up. You, me, we have set up these aspects within ourselves that somehow make life tolerable. But it is possible to go beyond into higher levels of truth and liberation. And I think that's why Nelson Mandela was able to love and forgive, even though the other people that spent 27 years in prison, or these other people, were shocked when he was like, we saw a scene in the movie where, after he'd been released and the rugby team, that's the focus of this one movie. And this group of black Africans were saying, we vote to change the name and the color scheme of the Springboks. That was kind of like, if you're going to, we're not going to call the Dallas Cowboys anymore, we're going to be whatever. And Nelson Mandela said, no, that's a mistake. We're going to lose, we're trying to unify. And people were just like baffled about how can this guy who had been imprisoned by these people, mistreated by them for 30 years, why does he care? Well, when you do away with the dweller of the threshold, more and more, you recognize that those behaviors are self-protective and they're not based in love. The people who wanted to change the name wanted to basically give the finger to the white Afrikaners to go, now it's our turn. But that does not move the needle in the direction that Nelson Mandela wanted. He wanted unification because he knows that's when people are happier. So when the dweller on the threshold is losing life, you will be able to see more clearly. You will be able to recognize that most people are driven a certain percentage of time by the dweller that is within them. So you won't go like, what is wrong with God that He lets these things happen? It's like, this is part of a creation that begins within you the moment you start to have things not go your way in life. And if you happen to be a very bright person, you'll come up with very sophisticated ideas that justify these behaviors. So, what is the invitation? The invitation is to begin to notice when you are tempted to engage in these behaviors that are probably driven by this part of oneself. The threshold that we're speaking about is your passageway into higher spiritual liberation. You know, when you read somebody like this guy, Manly Hall, you have to imagine he's seen things that a lot of us will never get to see, because maybe he just did the work. Maybe he did the work over a number of lifetimes and, you know, he's become more advanced. But I find that what he speaks about and how he speaks, he doesn't have an agenda to make a lot of money. He doesn't have an agenda to be seen as great. There's something in his tone that's like, this is my perception of the truth. So I'm always interested in going across the next threshold, because it's so, like I was saying last night at the dinner, like, what is this frickin' experiment known as humanity? It's fascinating. That a person, we don't have to plug into a wall socket. We're just energized by something. Our hearts keep beating, and our minds can conceive of stuff that we can't really verify. It's like, is the universe infinite? Is there a God? But the clues are your experience. And if you're honest, you'll go, yeah, I definitely have a dweller on the threshold. Luckily, most people can't see it. And most of the time, you don't even want to see it. Because I don't want these behaviors that I like to do occasionally disrupted. But I'm encouraging you to want to see what happens if you start to disrupt them. And I'll guarantee you it's hard. It's a major battle. And the parts in you that don't want that to change are going to fight very hard. And that's why the real spiritual path can be exhausting. You know? And then it's just like, ugh, the hell with it. I'm going to gorge on food today because it's just so hard. It is hard. I want to give you that, you know, because I've been doing it for 17, 18 years on this mystical path, and I was trying for 20 years on my own without real proper instruction. So getting instruction and having a community meant I could really have confidence in what I was trying. But there's no one can do this for you. You know, choose to face it, and then you may have to fight that battle a long time until that dragon is is done with life. You become very vulnerable because you no longer have those behaviors and those mindsets that are very effective in protecting us against the harshness of the world. But what ends up happening is you gain wisdom. And you go, okay, I have to be protected in these situations because that person's a little caustic in his wit, and that person is a little bit weird, and that person's got a little bit of a sexual predatorial energy. Yeah, you'll begin to see that that's how the world is. But then there are times when you don't have to be protective. And you can really relax, and then talking about faith, like your faith goes, what is the essence of faith? Like you can explore that and go, really, it's a decision to courageously move forward and see what happens. Does faith create a bridge to the thing or not? You have to risk that. Much like when I make a sermon like this, you decide whether or not you're going to take it to heart and begin to do this work. And why would you? Because you would have faith in what I say. I only want you to have faith enough to start the process. But I think, based on the energy I can feel in this room, you guys can perceive the truth in yourselves, to what degree you have something like that. Maybe you haven't explored it in great depth. And maybe you've rationalized a way to go, it's not that bad. It's not as bad as those people. Or I basically can control it whenever I want. You probably can't. And when you begin to explore this, you'll go, man, this is a monster. It is a monster. And that's not because God wanted us to have a monster. It's because, you know, I think we didn't pay attention. And human beings really like to do their own thing. When you live on a planet where we got limited space, which doesn't really feel like limited space, but you know what I mean, like we got neighborhoods where our houses are 20 feet apart, we have to be considerate of other people. Otherwise, it's going to be chaos, which, in my opinion, much of the world is in chaos, and I'm including the U.S. You know, I mean, we have a relatively tranquil neighborhood around here. Occasionally it gets a little boisterous, but it's pretty mellow. You know, the last thing I want to share, I listened to this guy talk about what really happens in North Korea. It is like, it's psychotic, man. It's like worse than the Holocaust, according to this man's research about how people are treated in North Korea. I don't really want to get into the details of it. I might send you it's like a TED Talk or something like that. But that's as we speak. We live in this incredible freedom where occasionally a neighbor's a little noisy and it's irritating. These people live in chronic fear that people are going to come to their house and send them to some internment camp because they don't agree with the supreme leader. And there's not enough food there, and there's no economic interaction with most of the world. And it's like Manly Palmer Hall says, if you try to dominate people, ultimately it will fail. But for periods of time, it doesn't fail. And I can't imagine the fear and the terror and the energy that people live in some of these places where you have these governments that are just, I mean, talk about the dweller guiding or driving their lives. It's really, really sad. So I don't see the world as a very peaceful place. But we can create a peaceful environment here, and we can create a peaceful environment ourselves, and then you'll see that you have some sort of a raging war inside at times. So if you want to grow spiritually and be free, I'm inviting you to begin to explore that, because at least within our community, we can talk about it. You won't be able to talk about this when you go about your general social world, because unless people are meditating and open to it, they're not going to understand it. They're going to think you're crazy, and they're going to go, no, you're fine. Like, you're so super sweet, and I don't know what you're talking about. And like, yeah, we all want to drop 2 or 3 pounds, but you know, what's the big deal? I'm talking about cold, hard truth here of humanity, and I want you to want to be free of it and see what happens when you take things on at this kind of level. You know, I mean, that's just the kind of priest I am. I want to go to the highest place that I can.